one way of explaining the concepts I'm talking about here and how important family and kinship can be in different cultures that I like to do with students when we're doing a face-to-face class is to ask you to draw a house. And let's just do it right now, even though I'm not there with you. If you'll draw a house, nobody's judging you on your art quality. You're safe in the walls of your own home. Just draw me a house, okay? Roof, door, porch if you want it, windows, big old dish TV, I don't know, whatever you're into. Draw a house. Got it? Okay, good. Now what I want you to do is think of this house as society, any human society, okay, any human social group. And then what I want you to do is label the parts of the house according to what part of society they represent. So for example, you might label the window as economy, or you might label the roof as politics. I don't know, whatever you think. But point being, make sure you include families or kinship somewhere in there. Okay? All right, now look at your drawing and ask yourself, why did you label the parts of the house the way you did? If you're anything like most people when they do this activity, there's probably about a 50-50 chance that you put family as either the door, which is a pretty prominent place, right, the front door, or the foundation of the house. And I think when people put family here as the foundation of the house, the foundation of society, they're not just sort of being trite or something like that, but I think they're actually kind of picking up on something that's actually valid sociologically and ethnographically, and that is that for societies generally, family relationships and relatedness in general becomes this sort of square one. And in saying that and acknowledging that, I want to make very clear that I understand that people were raised in a variety of different environments. Some people may not have had a family. Some people may have had not an ideal family. And so in suggesting that families form a square one of society, I'm not trying to say that that's the case for everyone's life. I am trying to suggest, though, that as we look across cultures, cultures tend to kind of root themselves in and have foundations in the smaller family units. So let me give you some examples of what I mean by that. Because although you can kind of see that in American society, it actually becomes a lot more clear when you look at a lot of other societies. So first, let's just kind of think about this logically, right? For a species to perpetuate itself, it needs to successfully adapt to its environment and thereby be able to pass on its gene, just like we were talking about earlier when we were talking about biological evolution. For a culture to perpetuate itself, for a society or a social group to exist over the long term, it needs to not only create new human beings, pass on the genes, so to speak, but it needs to also pass on the culture. So those two different things, creating the next generation in your culture and providing that next generation with the cultural teachings to keep the culture going, we can refer to as reproduction and enculturation. So enculturation is the process by which human beings pick up culture and are trained in culture from the groups that they live within. So enculturation is the fact that if you this may vary depending on where you grew up, but generally speaking, having grown up in the US, you're probably used to the idea of queuing before buses, right? The idea that when you go up to a grocery store register, when you go up to a bus, whatever it is, you get into a queue, you get into a line. Enculturation is that, right? At some point you picked that up. It's not like little tiny American babies pop out of the delivery room being like, well, now I'm going to line up for the bus, right? For that matter, they don't even know how to walk or talk. So those are both things they have to be enculturated into, particularly the talking part. You have to be enculturated to know how to hunt a gazelle if you're in a hunting and gathering society, or to know how to successfully fish a salmon using nets that go across the entire river with weighted stones if you're a traditional Dena'ina person prior to colonialism. So all of these things are enculturation, right? And it turns out that a lot of enculturation happens right there in the home. That's not the only place it happens, definitely not. We can think of a lot of other places, right? You get enculturated in your school system, you get enculturated just hanging out with other people in your age group, things like that. But a huge part of enculturation is what human beings experience in the home. And, there's kind of a really good biological reason then that we have families, which is that for human beings to survive, they both need to survive, right? They have to go from infant to adult, which is a very vulnerable time for human beings. We are very, very vulnerable in our infant stage, which might seem obvious, but as we'll talk about in a second, that's not always the case for animals. And then we also, to survive as human beings, you need to pick up a cultural life way at least well enough that you can interact with others of your group and get the resources that you need, get the food and shelter that you need. So for human beings, survival is a matter of surviving your vulnerable childhood and also picking up culture. And that, again, that kind of relates to a deeper dynamic within evolution and within animals in general. So I want to introduce you to a concept called K species and R species, which you're like, that sounds super lame and boring, but boy, are you wrong. Prepare to be fascinated. Buckle your seatbelts. So if you think about passing on one's genes, if you think about that sort of the goal of natural selection, you realize that there's kind of two different ways to do that. And that's what biologists have realized as we've studied lots and lots of animals. We've realized that there's really two main strategies that animals take when it comes to passing on their genes. Our species, like a fruit fly, like a mosquito, like a mouse, like a whole lot of other animals, they basically just pump out a lot of babies, pure and simple, or a ton of eggs. They just make as many babies as possible and don't really care for them after they're born and just hope for the best. Give them a high five and you're on your way. I remember on my honeymoon, we saw a sea turtle lay like 100 eggs, and then she literally just waddled off. She was like, peace, and was off to the ocean. So those are K species, right? R species. And with R species, the assumption is that many, if not most, of the offspring will die, but at least a few will make it through. You know, if your offspring have a 1% survival rate, well, have 100 babies, at least one of them gets through. K species, by contrast, is something like an elephant. 1 or 2 babies at a time, and then invests heavily in that baby. Around here, your kind of really obvious K species would be like a polar bear or a grizzly bear or a black bear. They're really good examples. Mooses as well, right? 1 or 2 babies at a time, and really spend time taking care of those babies, getting them to where they're healthy and strong, making sure they survive, and that they have the survival skills necessary, and they've been trained properly to fend for themselves, or at least integrate into the group successfully. Now, you might be asking yourselves, why don't you be both a K species and an R species? Why don't you have 100 babies and also take care of all of them? Awesome. And if you're saying that, it's because you're not a parent and you don't understand how stressful it is to have children and invest into them in that way. But no, more seriously, it's because animals have a limited amount of energy and time. They can't both have 100 babies and take care of all those 100 babies the way that an elephant takes care of its single calf. That's just mathematically impossible. So species tend to be more one of these things or the other. Have a lot of babies, hope at least one survives, or have one baby and really, really make sure that thing survives. Now, where would you put humans? Humans are very obviously a K species, right? We're the most ridiculously K species. We have typically only one child at a time, and then that one child is dependent on us for at least like 12 years. Most societies, 12, give or take, is kind of going to be your basement of when a society might start to think of a child as starting to take on more grown-up roles. But for most societies, it'd be even later than that, 14, 16, 18, 20, 45, I don't know, maybe some of us are still dependent on our parents, I'm not sure. But the point is, human beings have a very long dependency, and that's partly because we are very vulnerable when we're first born, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's also because we need culture, and it takes a very long time to successfully imprint culture on children until they can manage themselves and manage their own affairs and do things successfully in society. And so humans are a K species. You're saying, what does any of this have to do with family? And I think you see what this has to do with family. Humans kind of biologically are predispositioned to need some kind of stable unit within which to be enculturated and within which to get through their vulnerable childhoods. And so one can think of families, I know this doesn't sound terribly romantic or terribly idealistic, but one can think of families as being, among other things, sort of biology's answer to human infants surviving well and getting enculturated, right? It provides them with a stable space in which they can undergo their vulnerable period and also undergo that time period where they need to be enculturated.